My name is Rachel Turner. I'm 34. I have 2 kids, Mia, who is 8, and Ben, who just turned 6. 2 weeks ago, I found out my parents were taking every grandchild in our family on a 10-day vacation to the coast. Every grandchild except mine. I didn't find out from a phone call or a family dinner. I found out because my sister forwarded me the wrong screenshot. One second I was reading a joke about a group chat name, and the next I was staring at a full itinerary. Flights, a rental house with 6 bedrooms, a private boat trip, a water park day, a closing dinner at a restaurant that required reservations, with a guest list that had my brother's 3 kids, my sister's 2 kids, and nowhere in any line, my son and my daughter. I read it twice, then a third time, waiting for my kids' names to appear somewhere I'd missed. They didn't. I didn't call my mother screaming. I didn't send an angry text. I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat there long enough for it to go cold. Then I opened my laptop and did something none of them saw coming. But to understand why I did what I did, and why the photo I sent on the first night of that trip took less than 4 hours to blow the whole thing apart, you need to understand what it took to get me there. It wasn't one trip. It was years of small, deniable moments that finally added up to something too large to keep denying. Before I get into it, tell me where you're watching from, and drop a comment if anything like this has ever happened in your family. I'm curious how common this actually is, because for years I genuinely thought it was just us. I'm the middle child. My brother Daniel is the oldest. Married, 3 kids, works in commercial real estate, and has always been, in my mother's words, the one who has it together. My sister Kayla is the youngest. Married for 4 years, 2 kids under 5, and she's still the baby to my parents, even though she's 31 with a mortgage of her own. I got divorced when Ben was 2. It wasn't messy, wasn't scandalous. My ex and I simply grew apart, and we've co-parented well ever since. No court battles, no ugliness. But something shifted in how my parents treated my family the moment I became a single mother raising 2 kids, without a husband standing next to me at family functions. It was subtle at first, then it wasn't. The first time I really noticed it, Mia was 5. It was my nephew's birthday party, and my mother handed out little goodie bags to every child there. Every child except Mia. When I asked her about it afterward, quietly so as not to make a scene, she said she'd run out and would get Mia something later. She never did. I told myself it was an oversight. I told myself that a lot. Back then. The next spring at the family barbecue, my dad set up a slideshow of grandkid highlights from the past year. School photos, sports games, dance recitals, Daniel's son's baseball trophy, Kayla's daughter's first steps. Daniel's kids appeared in 11 photos. Kayla's kids appeared in 9. Mine appeared in 1. A blurry picture from 2 Christmases prior, where you could barely make out Mia's face behind a stack of wrapping paper. When I mentioned it to my mother privately afterward, she said, "Well, you don't send us as many photos as they do." So I started sending photos every single week after that. First day of school, soccer games, art projects, everything. It didn't change anything the following year. The slideshow simply stopped being made at all, because it was getting to be too much work. Then there was the Christmas play. Mia had a lead role in her school's winter performance. She'd been practicing her lines for weeks, rehearsing them at the dinner table, in the bathtub, in the car. She was so excited to have her grandparents there. I sent the date 3 separate times, weeks in advance, then again the week of, then again the morning of. My parents didn't come. They told me afterward they'd already committed to Kayla's daughter's dance recital, which, it turned out, was scheduled for a completely different weekend entirely. I checked the flyer myself. When I pointed that out, my mother said she'd gotten the dates confused and that I shouldn't read into it. Mia asked me backstage why Grandma and Grandpa's seats were empty. I told her they got stuck in traffic. I have never felt like more of a liar than I did in that moment, protecting people who hadn't earned it. 2 summers ago, there was a family trip to my aunt's lake house. Every set of cousins was invited to stay the whole week. Pontoon rides, bonfires, the whole thing. Mine were invited for 1 single day because, as my mother explained it, the house isn't really set up for kids your children's age. Ben, at the time was 6 months older than my niece, who stayed the entire week without any issue whatsoever. When I brought up the age discrepancy, my mother changed the subject to ask whether I was bringing a dessert for the one day we were coming. Last year, there was a smaller moment that still stuck with me. My mother was babysitting Kayla's kids for a full weekend so Kayla and her husband could go to a wedding out of state. Completely reasonable, completely normal grandparent behavior. The same month, I asked if she could watch Mia and Ben for one Saturday afternoon so I could go to a work conference that mattered for my career. She told me she wasn't up for a full day and suggested I see if a sitter is available. I paid $60 for a sitter that day. Kayla didn't pay anything for an entire weekend. Each of these things, on its own, could be explained away. A goodie bag shortage, a scheduling mix-up, a house with limited bedrooms, being tired one particular Saturday. That's what made it so hard to name for so long. Every single incident came with its own plausible cover story. And every time I brought one up, somehow I ended up sounding petty, sensitive, dramatic, the difficult one. My mother had a real gift for making me feel like the problem was my noticing, not their pattern. But patterns don't lie, even when the people inside them do. Somewhere over those 3 years, I stopped believing it was timing, or space, or forgetfulness. I started understanding that in my parents' eyes, my children had quietly become the grandkids who came with an asterisk, the ones from the complicated family, the ones who didn't need to be prioritized the way the others did because their mother would understand. Their mother always understood. Their mother never made a scene. Which brings me back to that Tuesday afternoon, sitting at my kitchen, counter with a stranger's itinerary glowing on my phone screen. The trip Kayla had accidentally shared with me was 10 days at a coastal rental, house my parents had booked for the whole family, every cousin, every aunt and uncle, a private boat outing, a water park day, a big group dinner on the last night at what looked like an upscale restaurant with a dress code listed in the confirmation email. It was, by every visible measure, the trip of the summer, and in the guest list, spelled out in a shared spreadsheet with everyone's flight times color-coded by household, there were exactly 7 grandchildren listed. Daniel's 3, Kayla's 2, and 2 of my cousin's kids added as a maybe pending work schedule. Not Mia, not Ben, not even a maybe. I called Kayla, keeping my voice level, and asked her what the spreadsheet was. She went quiet for a second too long before she said, "Oh, that's just, Mom's been planning the summer trip." "I thought you knew." I told her I didn't know. She got flustered and said she was sure it was just a spacing thing, that there probably wasn't room for 2 more kids in the house, that I should just call Mom directly. So I did. I kept my voice calm and asked my mother, plainly, whether Mia and Ben were coming on the coastal trip. There was a pause, the kind of pause that already told me the answer, and then she said, "Oh, honey, we didn't think you'd want to bring them. It's a lot of driving for you, and with everything going on, we figured it would be easier on everyone if it was just the older kids group this time." The older kids group. Mia is 8. My niece, who was going, is 7. Ben, at 6, is older than my sister's youngest, who was also going. I asked her to clarify what everything going on meant, since my life had been stable and unremarkable for well over a year. She backtracked, said she didn't mean it like that, and then, almost as an afterthought, added, "Also, honestly, the house only sleeps so many, and Daniel's family needed the extra room since they're staying the whole time and his kids are older." I did the math out loud, gently. 6 bedrooms, Daniel's family of 5 in 2 rooms, Kayla's family of 4 in 1 room, my parents in 1 room. That left 2 bedrooms completely unaccounted for. My mother said she'd have to check with your father on the sleeping arrangements, and that she'd call me back. She did not call me back that day. I didn't argue further. I said okay, thanked her for clarifying, and hung up. That night, I was putting Ben to bed, tucking him in, and completely out of nowhere, he asked me, "Mommy, why doesn't Grandma ever ask us to go on trips?" I asked him what made him think that. He shrugged, the way 6-year-olds shrug when they're trying to sound casual about something that actually bothers them, and said, "Cousin Ella said they're going to the beach for her birthday, and I asked if we could go too, and she said Grandma said it's a house for the big family, not us. The big family, not us." I sat on the edge of his bed for a long time after he fell asleep, and I thought about every goodie bag, every slideshow, every empty seat at a school play, every $60 babysitter, and I understood, finally and completely, that this had never been about logistics. It had been about who my parents considered worth the effort. I didn't cry that night, and I didn't call anyone back. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and made a decision that had actually been building in me for 3 years. Not 3 hours. I opened a travel site and looked at a resort I'd wanted to take the kids to for a long time. A beachfront place 4 hours from where my parents were staying, with its own pool, a kids club, and a boat excursion of our own. It cost more than I'd planned to spend this year, more than I was entirely comfortable spending. I booked it anyway, same week as their trip, same length of stay, non-refundable rate because it was the only way to get the discount. There was something else going on for me at the same time that mattered just as much as the trip itself. I'd been putting off a certification exam for a promotion I wanted at work, the kind of exam that required weeks of quiet, focused study time I never seemed to find with the kids' schedules and a full-time job. Those same 10 days lined up almost perfectly with the exam window. I realized I could use the mornings at the resort, while the kids were at the kids' club, to finally study properly. Somewhere no one would ask me to run an errand or pick up sunscreen. This wasn't just a trip away from my family's exclusion. It was a trip toward something I'd been putting off for both my career and my kids, something entirely mine. I didn't feel triumphant booking it. I felt strangely guilty, like I was doing something sneaky, even though all I was doing was taking my own children on their own vacation with money I'd earned myself. That guilt told me everything about how deeply I'd absorbed the idea that my family's comfort had to come before my own decisions, even decisions that had nothing to do with them at all. I told no one. Not my parents, not Kayla, not Daniel. I started quietly saving screenshots. The itinerary Kayla had accidentally sent. The text where my mother wrote, "We didn't think you'd want to bring them." A photo of the old slideshow I'd taken 2 years earlier without fully knowing why at the time. I wasn't collecting evidence to start a war. If I'm honest, I think I was collecting it because some part of me already suspected that eventually, someone would try to convince me none of this had happened the way I remembered it. Over the next 2 weeks, the family group chat filled up with vacation logistics, grocery lists for the rental house, who was bringing floaties for which kid, what time the boat excursion left on day 4, a debate about whether to rent a second car for the beach days. My mother tagged me once, asking if I could pick up a case of sunscreen from the wholesale store before everyone left, since I had a membership and they didn't. I bought the sunscreen and dropped it at her house myself, and she thanked me warmly, without a hint of irony, without once mentioning that the trip she was prepping for didn't include my kids at all. Kayla texted me privately a few days later, sounding a little uneasy, like she already suspected something wasn't sitting right. "Hey, are you good with all this? Mom said you understood about the house situation." I told her I was managing, which was true, if incomplete. She didn't push further, and I remember feeling a small, cold disappointment that she didn't. 3 days before departure, my mother called to ask if I'd be around just in case. They needed something dropped off at the airport, since I lived closer than Daniel. I said I actually had plans that week. She said, "Oh, that's fine. We probably won't need it," in a tone that made clear she hadn't considered, even for a second, that plans might mean I wasn't going to be sitting at home while her trip happened around me like weather. 2 days before, my father called too, which was unusual. He rarely calls just to talk. He asked how the kids were doing, mentioned the trip in passing, said something about how, "It's just easier with the older group this time, you understand." I told him I understood the explanation. I didn't tell him whether I believed it. He didn't ask. I spent those final days packing quietly with the kids, who had no idea yet where we were going. I told them only that we had a surprise trip planned, and their excitement. Mia asking 100 questions a day, Ben insisting on packing his favorite stuffed shark 3 separate times, was the only thing that made the whole ugly situation feel worth what it was costing me, financially and emotionally. My parents' group left on a Thursday morning. I know because the group chat filled with airport selfies. Daniel's kids in matching travel outfits my mother had apparently bought them. Kayla's toddler asleep in a stroller, my mother captioning a photo of the whole crowd. "Off to make memories with our babies." I read that caption standing in my own kitchen, packing sandwiches for my kids' cooler, 4 hours before our own flight. My mother texted me around noon. "Everything okay at the house? Can you check the mail while we're gone?" I told her I wouldn't be able to, since I was traveling too. There was a long pause. I could see the typing bubble start and stop twice, before she wrote back, "Traveling where?" I told her the truth. Mia and Ben and I were headed to the beach ourselves, just the three of us, and I'd tell her more once we landed. She didn't respond right away. When she did, all she wrote was, "Oh, well, have fun, I guess." No questions about where, no questions about how. Just a flat, faintly annoyed acknowledgement, as if my having plans of my own was an inconvenience to her mental accounting of the week. We boarded our flight a few hours later. I remember looking out the window as we took off and feeling, for the first time in longer than I could name, like I wasn't waiting for anyone's permission to matter. We landed, checked into the resort, and the kids were out of their minds with excitement. A pool with a slide, a room with actual bunk beds just for them, an ocean view neither of them had ever had before in their lives. That first evening, we walked down to the beach as the sun was setting, and Mia and Ben ran ahead of me laughing, chasing the edge of the water, completely unaware of anything except how happy they were in that exact moment. I took a photo. Not posed, not staged, just the two of them, mid-laugh, gold light everywhere, the ocean stretched out behind them. It's one of the best photos I have ever taken of my children. I sat with that photo for almost an hour before I did anything with it, turning it over in my head, half-drafting captions I deleted before finishing. Then I opened the family group chat, the same one full of their airport selfies and boat excursion plans, and I posted it. No caption explaining where we were. No accusation, no snark, nothing that could be read as a jab on its face. Just the picture, and underneath it, 4 words. Having a wonderful time. I put my phone on the nightstand, got the kids ready for bed, read them a chapter of the book we'd brought, and didn't check it again for almost 2 hours. When I finally did, there were 41 messages. My mother had called twice, straight to voicemail, since I hadn't heard it over the sound of the waves outside our balcony. Kayla had sent 6 texts, the first asking where that photo was taken, the next 4 increasingly frantic, the last one just, "Call me, now." Daniel had written, "Are you serious right now?" in the family chat, followed by 3 angry face reactions from relatives I hadn't even realized were still in that group thread. I called my mother back. She picked up before the first ring finished, and her voice was somewhere between furious and panicked. "Where are you? What is going on? Why would you post that here tonight of all nights?" I asked her what was wrong with tonight specifically. She said Kayla's daughter had been crying at dinner because she saw the photo and asked why her cousins got their own beach and their own pool and she didn't. Ella, my niece, had apparently looked at the photo of Mia and Ben, laughing on a beach that looked nicer than the one they were on, and asked her mother, in front of the whole extended family at a restaurant, why Mia and Ben got a better trip than she did. I told my mother I hadn't posted anything designed to hurt anyone. I'd simply shared a photo of my own children, on their own vacation, exactly the way she had shared photos of her grandchildren, on their vacation, for the last 2 weeks straight, every single day, multiple times a day. She said I was being cruel, that I'd humiliated the family in public, that I'd ruined a moment that had nothing to do with me. I told her that was an interesting thing to say, about a trip that had, by design, everything to do with excluding me and my children before I ever said a single word about it. She went quiet for a moment. Then she said the thing I think she'll regret having said out loud for a long time. "They're too young to even remember this, Rachel. You're making something out of nothing." I said, "They're not too young to ask why they weren't invited." Ben asked me the exact same question 2 weeks ago, and I didn't have a good answer, because you never gave me one. She didn't respond to that. I heard my father's voice in the background, asking who she was talking to, and then the call cut out. I sat on the edge of the bed for a minute, my heart pounding harder than I expected it to, and then I checked on the kids, both fast asleep, completely unaware they were. At that exact moment, the reason an entire dinner table 4 hours away had gone silent. I found out later, through Kayla, what happened at that dinner table after my mother hung up on me. Apparently my Aunt Denise, who'd been at the restaurant with them, had asked, reasonably in front of everyone, why Rachel's kids weren't on the trip in the first place. My mother gave the house-size explanation again, the same one she'd given me. Denise, who apparently had seen the actual sleeping arrangement chart earlier that day, pointed out that the house had 6 bedrooms and only needed 5 for the families who were there, which meant there had, in fact, been room the whole time. That set off an argument that apparently lasted through the entire entree course. Daniel, defensive, said he needed the extra room because his kids were older and needed separate space, an explanation that conveniently ignored that Mia is the same age as his youngest. Kayla said she thought Mom had already talked to me about it and that I was fine with it, which forced my mother to admit, in front of the whole table, that she hadn't actually discussed it with me at all. She'd simply decided, informed everyone else it was settled, and assumed I wouldn't push back, the way I never had before. Denise, to her credit, said something Kayla repeated to me almost word for word 2 days later. You've spent years treating Rachel's kids like an inconvenience, and then you're shocked when she finally stops pretending she doesn't notice. The table went quiet. Ella cried again, this time because the adults were arguing, not because of the photo anymore. My niece from Daniel's side, who's 10 and apparently sharper than any of the adults gave her credit for, asked out loud why nobody had just invited Aunt Rachel's kids from the beginning if there was room the entire time. Nobody at that table had an answer for a 10-year-old that they hadn't already failed to give me for 3 years. My father, according to Kayla, said almost nothing the whole night, which she found more unsettling than if he'd argued. He apparently just kept looking at his plate. The next morning my mother called again, this time trying a softer approach. She said the trip was being overshadowed by drama and asked if I would post something to smooth things over, an apology, or at least a comment saying it was all a misunderstanding, so the rest of the trip could continue the way it was supposed to. I told her I wasn't going to do that, because nothing about it had actually been a misunderstanding. Then I did something I'd been holding on to since that night at the kitchen counter 2 weeks earlier. I sent her privately, not to the group chat, a short, plain list, the goodie bag incident, the slideshow with one blurry photo of my kids, the missed school play with the schedule that never actually conflicted, the one-day-only invitation to the lake house while my niece stayed the full week, the $60 babysitter versus the free full weekend, and now this. 6 separate incidents, each with a date, each with the exact excuse she'd given me at the time, laid out in a single message with no commentary attached. I wrote underneath it, I'm not sending you this so you'll apologize for one photo. I'm sending it so you understand this was never about one photo. She didn't respond for almost 6 hours. When she finally did, it wasn't an apology. It was, I didn't realize you'd been keeping track of everything like this. I told her that was exactly the problem, that I'd had to start keeping track. Because every single time, I was the only one who remembered any of it had happened at all. That afternoon, my Aunt Denise texted me directly, completely unprompted, saying she'd had no idea how consistent the pattern had been until she'd overheard enough of it argued out loud at dinner, and that she was sorry she hadn't said anything sooner over the years. She mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd noticed the goodie bag thing at the time, and had assumed it was a one-off, the same way everyone always assumed each individual moment was a one-off. That message meant more to me than anything my mother had said in the last 2 weeks combined. Word apparently traveled fast through the extended family after that. My cousin, whose kids had been the maybe on the guest list, texted asking if the story was true, and when I confirmed it was, she said quietly that she'd always wondered why my kids were never around at these things, and had never wanted to ask. We came home 4 days after my parents did. I'd finished my certification exam study during the mornings at the resort exactly as I'd planned, sunburned on one shoulder, and proud of myself in a way that had nothing to do with any of the family drama unfolding 4 hours south of us. My parents asked me to come over the following weekend to talk things through. I agreed, on the condition that Daniel and Kayla would both be there too, and that no one would talk over me while I said what I needed to say. When I arrived, the house felt different than it usually did. Quieter, more careful, the kind of tense that comes before people are forced to hear something they'd rather not. My father opened by saying he thought I'd overreacted by posting the photo without warning anyone first. I told him we could talk about the photo after we agreed on what had actually happened leading up to it. And I laid the same list on the table I'd sent my mother days earlier, printed this time, 6 lines with dates. My mother tried to call it a misunderstanding again, one more time, out of habit more than conviction. Kayla, to her credit, admitted she should have said something the first time she noticed the pattern, years ago, instead of assuming it wasn't her place to question how our parents treated my kids. Daniel stayed mostly quiet through most of it, offering only that he didn't think it was that deep, which told me plenty about where he still stood on his own. I told them my terms weren't complicated. My kids would never again be excluded from a family trip or event without a direct, honest conversation with me first. Not an assumption made behind my back, and then explained to me after the fact as already settled. If there genuinely wasn't room for everyone at some future event, that was a conversation to have honestly and early, not a decision to quietly make and hope I wouldn't notice or wouldn't push back. And if it happened again, I told them, I wouldn't be sending a photo next time. I simply wouldn't be part of the family's plans at all, permanently, and they could explain that absence to each other however they liked. My mother didn't like hearing that. For the first time in longer than I could remember, though, she didn't argue it either. She just nodded once and looked down at the printed list still sitting on the table between us. It's been a few months now. Things haven't magically become perfect. My mother still occasionally says something that reminds me old habits don't disappear overnight, a stray comment here or there that catches me off guard. Daniel has never really acknowledged his part in any of it beyond that one dismissive comment at the table, and I've made peace with the fact that he might never fully own it. But something did genuinely change. When my parents started planning a smaller trip for the fall, my mother called me directly, first, before anything else was decided, and asked what dates would actually work for Mia and Ben's school schedule. It was such a small thing. It shouldn't have felt as significant as it did, sitting there on the phone, being asked instead of informed. Ben doesn't ask anymore why Grandma never invites them. I don't know if he's forgotten the question or just quietly stopped expecting a different answer, and honestly, I'm not sure which one I want it to be. Mia, older and more perceptive, asked me once gently if Grandma and Grandpa were still upset about the beach photo. I told her they weren't upset with her, and that was true, and that some things between adults take longer to fix than others, which was also true. I passed my certification exam, by the way. Got the promotion 2 months later. It came with a raise that, over the course of a year, covered the cost of that resort trip several times over. A strange, almost poetic detail that I didn't plan and couldn't have predicted, but that felt right anyway. What I know for certain is this. I didn't send that photo to get revenge. I sent it because for years, my children had been quietly written out of the story of our family, one small deniable moment at a time, and I was finally done being the only one who noticed it happening. People will call what I did petty. Maybe it was. But I didn't sabotage anyone's vacation, and I didn't say a single untrue word to a single person the entire time. I posted one photo of my own children, happy, on their own trip. And the only thing that photo exposed was a truth my family had been carefully avoiding telling themselves for years. This video is a work of fiction, created for reflection and entertainment. If any part of this story felt familiar to you, I hope it reminded you of something worth saying out loud, before you're the only one left holding the receipts.